Hi, David Vizard here, and you are watching PowerTec 10. If you can afford a few minutes of your time, I'm going to give you the benefit of over 50 years of race winning experience. So what's the subject of this episode 28 of PowerTec 10? Well, it's something a little different. This here is a 186 head casting from the late 60s and early 70s. Now, and you'll see that it's blued up here. That's because I was working on these heads before I got to do this introduction. But anyway, note the chamber shape. There's more than one cylinder head with this chamber shape. I think the 049 is one of them, but this type of head was the head to have back in those days before there were any aluminum heads available. Now you might think, well, this is old technology and stuff like that. Yes, it is, but by the same token, we've had 50 years to find out what works on it and what doesn't. And this is what I'm going to do here. Not only am I going to resurrect this cylinder head here, I'm going to show you some moves that are very unlikely to have been either on your agenda or have crossed your path. So let's talk about that now. A brief history of these heads will be in order here, because we're going to make some moves that are very unconventional. First, back in the day, and that was kind of my day as well, they were the heads to have, and this is what was used for racing. My first, how shall I say, meeting with these heads was on a Lola T70 for McKechnie Racing in England. Most of you won't have heard of McKechnie Racing, but David Hobbs, who has been long time race commentator, used to drive for them. Now, we had this Lola T70 and it cracked the heads. And the owner had just bought the car, and he was a confident race car driver, but he had not got an international license, only a national one. Anyway, I had to rush around and find some heads to grind. And like I said, this is my first introduction to Chevrolet. Well, folks, you might notice I've got a different shirt on. Good reason. It's a couple of days later. I had a rush job to do. But anyway, back to the story. Had 3 weeks to not only find some cylinder heads, but also figure out how to do them, because I'd never done any before. Well, I managed to get some from a wrecking yard that was right next to a US Air Force base, where a lot of cars that had been involved in accidents over the years, and I guess Americans got involved in accidents a little more often than the English guys, for the simple reason that they were driving cars on the other side of the road with steering wheels on the other side to England. So once in a while they would make a mistake and forget, hence crashes. Anyway, I managed to find some heads, and I had 3 weeks to go from start to finish. Made it by the skin of my teeth. I spent a very intense couple of weeks on the flow bench, and I finished the heads from start to finish in 1 week. I managed to get 3 cylinder heads, so that was good. How well did they work? Just fine. We picked up 50 horsepower over the opposition. To give some kind of chance of these heads not cracking, I stuck with the 1.94 intake valves, right, and worked on them from there. I also minimized how much metal I cut to de-shroud them, but it was very scientifically done, and I think what happened was I managed to get the bare minimum of metal out to get the results I was looking for, so any weakening of the chamber was significantly less. Anyway, got the heads to McKechnie Racing. That's the team that David Hobbs used to drive for. You know David Hobbs, the commentator on one of the big channels, can't remember. Not to worry. The cracking problem seen on the US modified heads was a real issue. Basically, those heads would last about one race. That means anywhere from 75 miles to maybe 300. And they were expensive. By the time you stuck on import duty, in today's money, we'd be talking about $8,000–9,000 a pair for a set of cast iron. No, make that 12,000, right? So it was expensive. So I had an opportunity here maybe to supply heads to far more than just McKechnie Racing. The cylinder heads I was working on were intended for a 302-inch Lola T70, and it was destined to race for its next race at Hockenheim in Germany. The driver was a novice international driver. In other words, he had a national license, he was experienced, but he'd never done an international race before, let alone raced at Hockenheim. But he was a pretty good driver. Anyway, when he arrived at the track, he made the mistake, and it turned out that it wasn't, but that's fortuitous, of asking the Surtees team, as he passed their 3 Lola T70s, what final drive they were using. So, realizing that he was a novice, they didn't give him the right information. They told him one ratio higher than they were actually using. As it happened, the extra power that our engine was making here was pretty much all in terms of foot-pounds. So they inadvertently advised him with the perfect ratio for the track. For a driver new to the track, our guy qualified pretty good. I can't remember the position on the grid, but it was better than expected. Anyway, flag comes down and off they go, and it's not too long before he's passed every single 5-litre sports racing car out there, Lola or not, right? And by the end of the race, he's tagging on Brian Redmond's rear bumper. Well, not quite. He was probably 10 or 15 feet behind him. Now, Brian Redmond is, or has been, multiple champion in so many race divisions that you can put him down as a world-class driver. And here's our beginner at international events, new to the track, new to the car, comes zipping in second place. Well, this caused a lot of commotion in the pits after. Everybody knew that this guy must have a 400-inch engine. Well, it was suitably protested and suitably stripped down, and guess what? 302 inches. I can tell you, as soon as word got around that I had done those cylinder heads, my telephone about fell off the wall. I had orders for about 90 sets of heads within, I don't know, 3 weeks, a month, just on that one outing alone. Unfortunately, there was no way I could cope with them all. So, didn't pan out as well as it sounds in practice. Well, you can see what the background is for these heads, or these head mods that I'm going to show you here on these 186 heads. I know that some of the folks out there are going to say, well, we could go out and buy a set of good heads and that. Well, so you can. You won't learn any porting skills though. But the other thing is although these heads are very old, like 50 years now, the technology that we're using on them isn't. We've had 50 years to find out what makes them work. Well, that's what you're going to get delivered. So porting a set of these heads is going to get you a killer performance. Now, interestingly enough, if you don't want to port a genuine set of double hump 186 heads, then TorqueFlow does an aluminum replica which will port up in pretty much the same way here, and you'll have more material to play with. So if you follow the tips that I give you here, you could get even more performance out of their heads than I'm getting out of these. If you want to go the cheap way, do it. All you've got to do is find some 165 valves. You could use secondhand 1.94 valves out of a Chevrolet. You know, the valves aren't going to be that particular. But if you want to do this at home, trust me, you can get a hard charging engine out of it. Here's our 186 casting. Just for reference, here is the casting number. Right? The head's referred to as a 186 casting, and that's the last 3 digits of the number. To get the head shot blasted and crack tested. These heads are prone to cracking through here into the water jacket if they've ever been overheated. If they're modified and you take too much metal away from here, they crack. We are going to see if we can install, there's enough seat area to install a 194 valve, 1.94, smaller. And we will put in a 1.650 exhaust valve. Why is this? Well, the smaller valve will be less shrouded. We are limited on how much we can take from here without the head cracking. So we're going to forfeit some intake flow, won't be much, but we'll pick up some exhaust flow, which means we'll need a cam with a slightly different timing to make the best of it. But that's okay. What we're looking for here is a head modification deal that will be reliable without cracking at these key points and make good low speed torque whilst making some pretty decent top end power. Our first move is to locate some gasket locating dowel pins and spray Dicom on the head. Before you start doing anything, make sure all oil seals are taken off the guides. Then, using some of this awesome stuff you can get from Dollar General, right, spray the heads down, or the head, brush through the guide, give everything another spray down, brush it all off, and then dry off what you can with tissue until it gets down to a state where you can blow it off with an airline. Dab what you can dry with tissues and then finish it off with an airline. And to prevent it all going rusty, a waft of WD-40, not too much, otherwise the marking glue that we're going to put on in the next step won't stick. When you apply the Dicom, you need to only do it in strategic areas, right, and that's around there, there, there. with lacquer thinner on, wipe the valve seat clean as you see here. Install the dowel pins. Now locate the head gasket. And remember, this is the block side. The head side, that's the up side, is underneath. Scribe round the bores. What we are now going to do is to put Prussian blue onto the rim of the valve. And we're doing this to see if, when we put this into the head, that it blues up the head and shows us whether or not we have enough room to put smaller valves in. Right, here we go with the smaller valves. Well, from this shot here, although it's not terribly clear, you can see that we do have a platform available to us to put in the smaller valves. Here's another valve that's got a more clear picture of what we're trying to show. So, in spite of the fact that these seats were cut for a 202 valve, they were not cut to a size such that we are left with enough material to install a 1.94 valve. That's good news. Let's take a look and see what's been done so far. Right, let's remove, this is my Goodson 3D cutter, which goes on this pilot here, which I use my digital readout to center. Now, first move on all the chambers was to cut round here, and the distance between the cut and the line here, let me take this out, be able to see better. The distance between the cut and the line here is about 10 thousandths. That will give us about, when I've done the exhaust, 4 inches across, 4 inch 30 across the bore, give or take about 10 thou. It's close enough. Now you can also see I've cut the top cut of the seat. Well, this is the 30-degree top cut. At this point, once you've established a base with the downward cut of this tool here, then I cut a 30-degree top cut 2 inches wide for this 194. Right, so now we've established this here, the floor, and this top cut here. Right, with that we will neatly snug our 1.94 valve in here and be able to machine the bowl there. So let me just finish machining all these here and we'll move on to the next stage. Just so that you know what I'm talking about, here's my Goodson bowl hog. I should show it up this way, then you can see how the cutter here cuts the form. Well, here's what our Goodson bowl hog does. It takes a whole bunch of metal out in the bowl, as you might have guessed from its name, but also it puts the right angle on this edge here. Bowl hog works very well in this instance. It doesn't work in every instance, although I suspect that some of the times it doesn't work as well as it could do is because something else in the bowl may be wrong, but that's open to interpretation. The principal detail I want you to notice here are the seats. They're outlined in black here. Right, now you might well wonder why I've cut the seats and haven't finished the chambers. Well, that is because we are going to de-shroud this in a proper geometric fashion, not that old guesswork that you see so often. I'll show you how that's done in a few moments, but what I want you to notice, and I know I've pointed it out in other places here in this video, is this bowl here. Take a good look at that there. This side here, for the first about half an inch, is leaning by 10 degrees. And then it straightens up and goes into here. That's so that we can get a good radius for the gases coming over like this. Same at the back here. This bit from about here down to about here is 10 degrees. This here is not. There's a small radius there, and it's straight off that corner, as is the case here. With the exhaust, we have about a 15 degree angle like that coming off there. Then it goes into the radius, right, and that's so the exhaust gases can flow out like this. I don't think there's much I can show you from the exhaust port here, but we'll take a look at that later. I'll go through and detail it, and we'll do some molds. Our de-shrouding procedure starts with the use of a quarter ball bearing. This is a flow ball. I've put their address up before and their contact details, but I'll put them up again. Now, let's look at how this works. Right here, we've lifted the valve a quarter of an inch, right? You see how it comes through in an unshrouded area here. But now, as we go round, so we find we can't pull it out. What this means is the wall here is too close. Right, so what we're going to do is we are going to relieve that so that this ball will pull through. Now there's a limit that we can do it. Although it would like to, in terms of flow, the chamber would like to be reshaped quite a bit here. That's where they crack. So cracking region is across here. Now I'm sure that a lot of head porters knew they were going to crack, and when I was doing these Formula 5000 / sports, GT sports stuff like Lola's and that, they were buying a set of heads for every meet, and that was like $2,500, maybe even $3,000 back in 1970. Yeah, 1970. So we want this to live. Part of the reason we used a smaller valve is there's more clearance between here and here, so we don't need to de-shroud as much. Now once we've done it with this ball, we'll graduate to a bigger one and we'll work this here. Again, there's a limit to how much we can do this without it cracking, so follow my instructions there. Let me first do this one. Where each zone of de-shrouding occurs with these flow balls. First off, we have the 1/4 inch one, which will come out, lift it there, and you'll see that it's pretty much a dead fit in. There will be by the time I've emered it. Right, and that goes round to there. From there, right round. Now then, now remember that point there. This is where it gets bigger going that way. So the next ball we have is a 5/16. Right, that will not make it out through there, but when we get to about here, let's lift this to the requisite amount. There we go. When it gets around to about here, right, it should pull through. There we go. It should pull through. So from there to about here is the 5/16 ball. This isn't quite pulling through yet, but it will do when I've emeryed it. Then we go to the 3/8 ball. Right. That, you lift the valve to 3/8, right, and that will pull through from there to just there. And then the last bit is a 7/16 ball. And I want you to note how I deal with the spark plug area. Right, this pulls out just at the last bit by the spark plug hole. Right, just there. Now then, a little point to note here is this area here. If you look at the other cylinders, you'll see that the spark plug kind of sinks in here. Well, you take that lip off there and bring it level with this here, just that there. Now what this represents is the best compromise between staying reliable in terms of cracking, yet getting the airflow. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clean this area up here, and we'll just do a final check. Next step is we're going to emery the chamber to the final shape. Right, not much to come off. Makes it a lot easier to do this by cutting a 3-inch disc available from Harbor Freight to about 2 inches. You can actually get them at 2 inches. Now see how that fits in there? Pretty good. Now, just so that we don't cut lots of lines, we're going to put little tabs in here. A point to note here: cutting this emery stuff is very hard on scissors. I bought these at Harbor Freight about 4 years ago, and with all the grinding I do and trimming of these, they still cut. Right, so they got a life so far about 4 times a normal pair of scissors. $4.99 as well. Right, here we go. Now we just lightly fold the edges up here like this, and we are ready to go. And here's what that side of the chamber looks like when it's done. When you're doing this, be sure not to go over the gasket marks. In fact, you should stay that 10/1000ths away from them. Here's our 165 valve in place. We're going to pull off a procedure similar to what we did with the intake. Right, first but there is a difference, I should have said that. What we're going to do is we're going to area rule this port. Right, the flow at low lift is not really affected much by the discharge coefficient because it's supersonic, and it's affected more by the area. So we have to make sure that this, I should have said, it's supersonic up into the 150, 200 range. So we're going to area rule the port and the valve so that there's the maximum area right at 250. So that's our first job, is to de-shroud, and that might need some port work to do just off the seat, but we're going to de-shroud this area here. Right, so that's our first move. Okay, here's one side of the exhaust done. Relevant points are that we do not go over the gasket line here. I slipped there, but this head's got to be skimmed about 40/1000ths. Right, now this area here you can undercut it, so this is further that way than that line. Do that so that we can just get this 1/4 inch ball to come out there, right, like so, right to about there, almost comes out there. Now then, that's about all the de-shrouding we have to do on that side, and here's why. If we de-shroud this side too much, it slows the exhaust flow on the floor of the port there. And what that does is it makes the engine seem more cammy. In other words, it doesn't come up on the cam quite as soon, right? It serves no useful purpose to take this back any further other than to reduce output, right? So that's it there. So it's shaved very slightly in here, right? That's it. Now we're going to focus our attention on this side of the valve and what we do here. This is an important step. Here's how what I call a hyper scavenge plateau. I used to just call it plateau, but now it's a scavenge plateau and then a hyper scavenge, and it works really well. When the piston comes up at the end of the exhaust stroke, it gets very close to the cylinder head, right, and it squeezes out the gases from between the quench pad and the piston, and they come out at amazingly high speed. At the edge of the plateau with a tight quench, they can be going over 500 miles an hour, right? Now if you've got a conventional heart-shaped chamber, you're gonna be asking the exhaust gases, which are going at 500 miles an hour just here, to be able to make that turn and go out. Well, guess what? Most of it doesn't. Right? What happens is it goes straight over the top of the valve, and you lose that energy in amongst all of this mixed up intake and exhaust charge. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to cut here, right around here, and flatten this area out so that when the quench comes, it makes it round this turn and goes straight out the valve. That increases the scavenge on the chamber, and it increases the flow on the far side of the valve, right? So now you know why we didn't shroud it, because the gases coming out of here could interfere with that, and this is the best way to get it out, not that. So let's get grinding here and cut that. Here's the plateau roughed out. Make sure you carry this form through here, and you can do a little bit of undercutting here. Don't go over the gasket line. Be sure when you do this that you start off cutting down here more than here, so that that surface curves into the seat, right? Don't go past the top cut that's on there, because you'll need that for final blending. Anyway, that's my next move, is to blend that. Now, somebody's going to ask, do we do the same over here? No, this is a no-go area here. Any more de-shrouding than that, you're going to lose flow. At this point, you'll see why I left 2 or 3 thousandths on the valve seats. Using a tool like this is a flat disc, which I've cut these little windmill ends, and then I go into the port like so, and polish the immediate space under the seat, take off the corners on the seat, and then radius the top of the seat into the actual seat itself. Now this will have taken a couple of thousandths off the seat and maybe made it not hyper accurate, but we're just going to touch the 2 seats now just to bring them back into being. Well, I could attempt a guided tour of the port here, or the ports, but it occurred to me that it would be a very cursory deal. There's really only a couple of points that you can see from the outside looking in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to point out those things that you can see better from the outside looking in. Then we'll do a guided tour of a port mold. What you're seeing here is a view down the intake port. One of the difficult things to see from a mold is the size difference between the top and bottom of the port. Remember, this is the roof of the port, this is the floor. It's upside down here for lighting. Now, notice how it's much wider down here. Up here, there's virtually no material been taken off here. Now, this is an important move, right? Taking material off here doesn't help the flow. It cuts port velocity and cuts port energy. There is nothing to be gained. All the air is up here. Take note of what I tell you when we look at a port mold. Side view of port. Points to note. See, there's almost no radius here. It comes off the seat just shy of 90 degrees, right? Goes straight to about here, then it curves round. This curve here is the sharpest here and gets less as it goes round. Right. Note here, this curve here, and the fact that I've got more of a radius on there. Also see how, well, you can't see it easy here, but the floor from about here, the floor of the port from about here, all the way to about here is rough. Not so on the roof. Now let's look at it from another angle. The way I have this positioned here, the manifold faces straight like that. Notice the port is sweeping across. You will see that there is an enlargement along this wall here to partially compensate for the pinch point. Also, across the top of the port, it is widened as much as possible. Not so with the bottom. That is as near stock as possible. Not much flows down there. Note how this turn here is a very generous and gentle turn into this side here, which is the cylinder center. That cylinder center is, now let me get around there, is down like that there. On the other hand, you should be able to see that this is much bigger here, and that the high-speed flow that is mostly in this top corner here goes down there, can get to here, and it's got plenty of room between it and the guide so that it swings around easier in a swirling action. You'll notice from our swirl tests on the heads that the swirl was pretty good. And that's good for low speed torque, especially if you're going to use a set of heads like this on the street. The bowl area of any porting job is the most critical out of the lot, notwithstanding that it's had a good seat job done on it. Center of the cylinder is here. Chevy port is angled across like this. Most of the air is flowing on this side, or would like to. So you cut the port where the air wants to go, not where you think it should go. So come around here. You'll notice how much wider it is here than here. That is because 60% of the air is on this side of the guide here, and only about 40% on the other. Notice it's bulged out, and the port has a general lean on it. If we did the center line of the port between there and there, compared to the center of the valve, it's leant over like this. This area here has the 10-degree slope on it that I mentioned from my Goodson cutter. This here is leaning probably around about 8 degrees the other way, right? This part of the bowl from there to there, right down to the seat, is the critical part. Make sure this turn here, and I've said this before, is as smooth as possible into the bowl here. Although only 40% of the air flows here, we'd like to make sure that as much as possible can go down here, consistent with it always being less than what's over here, right? And I think that covers what I'm going to say there. Cylinder center here. Again, see how, because the gases are coming out at an angle like this, how this here is bulged out, whereas this side isn't. There's much more clearance between this side of the valve stem and this side. Again, we've cut this port so that there's adequate valve stem length here to keep the valves cool. Well, this would be a good road racing port, right? Very little taken off the length of the guide. Now, note that the lean on this, very important, it's about this much. Our flow bench program indicates that this port actually needs more lean, but I'm concerned with the thickness of the casting, right? If I had a brand new casting to work with and sonicked it all and it was in good shape, I'm pretty sure I could get to close to 210 CFM out of this port here, right, by giving it more lean. I have to go to 700 to do that, but hey, that's it. This is not the ultimate port. I save my ultimate ports for vintage racing. So if anyone wants a vintage head for racing done, I can do it. It's going to cost you about $3 for just the porting. Anyway, this is 199 CFM at 700, but we're not lifting there. We're only lifting to about 600 on this engine. So we can access, I think it's 192 or 194 at 600. Points to note here. Comes off here quite sharp into this turn here, right? There's not a super amount you can do to this. At high lift, you want to keep the flow off of this side of the port and have it work on this side, well, from about this point right round to about here. Don't particularly want it to flow well here, because that will cause a low speed amount at the bottom of the port and it will reverse flow easier. Okay, points to note here are this area here coming into the port and the fact that it's leaning there. The gases are going out like this. Notice this is much larger here than here, right? The direction of the flow, literally at high lift, is the mass flow is moving in about that direction there. Again, I'd like to put a bit more bias on here, but we've got a casting thickness problem. Now let me turn it all the way around. Well, let's stop there first. You can see from this what a big bulge this is here. This is the cylinder wall side, right? And we go around a bit more here, and you'll also see that this enlarging is carried on all the way until it fades out where the port ends at the manifold face. So it's bulged out, the bulge gets slowly less and less and less. As it comes around here, so the area of the port's getting more and more, so it needs it less. So that you can get some idea of the performance of our modified 186 heads, I am going to make a comparison with a well-proven, I say well-proven, we recently dyno tested a set of AFR enforcers and they worked very well. We zipped by the 500 horsepower mark, no sweat whatsoever. Here are the two intake curves compared. Here's our 186 casting. Here is the AFR casting. Now bear in mind, we do have a 194 valve in here compared with the 202 valve there. So you can see intake wise we've done very well. Even down here we've got more flow than the enforcer head. So now let's take a look at the exhaust. Well, here's our exhaust. You can see that it's topping out at almost 200 CFM there. But it has a healthy advantage on an already good aftermarket head, an as cast aftermarket head, right? So you can see that for our efforts here, we've managed to pull a lot of flow, and if we've already got these iron castings, we've got this superior flow to a out of the box, well sorted aftermarket as cast cylinder head. As you may expect, more intake flow from essentially a smaller valve should mean more efficiency, and that's just what we see when we look at the discharge coefficient. That's the efficiency with which the port and valve combination runs. We see our 186 casting does very well. You'll see here it's up to about 83% efficient, and that's very good. That's seat work. The AFR heads are well known in the industry for being or having a very well proportioned seats to give good low lift flow. And that's what we see here. This is a good curve for an aftermarket head, amongst the best. So once again, our handiwork here has shown top quality results, at least on the intake. Now let's look and see what happens when we analyze the bigger valve on the exhaust. Well, here we have the exhaust. As you can see here, the efficiency of the AFR head at low lift was very high. That goes along with my comment earlier that AFR has some of the produces some of the most efficient conventional valve seats in the market. There's proof of it right there. Now ours is lower there. That's because we sacrificed some flow efficiency for area when the port was area ruled, and it shows up here. Not quite as much efficiency, but a port more apt to do well for the job. Now once we get to about 150 thousandths lift, the valve seat begins to lose its dominance of the situation, and we see a gain. This is all due to port down here of our 186 head casting with its 1.65 valve. Remember, that's a bigger valve, right? And it holds its own right up until here, which is well beyond the lift that we'll be using. I'm sure by now you've all heard that flow figures are not the be-all and end-all of producing horsepower. And that's exactly correct. Unfortunately, most of the people who will tell you that can't seem to get any further than that. Fortunately, we can. We can take this right to the end of the road. What we're looking at here is the mean velocity of the port. The target number for the intake is around about 300 at the valve lift that we're going to use, and that's about here. So we just about make it with about 302, right? Our AFR enforcer which, as I said, is a very functional cylinder head, is beaten everywhere. So what can we expect? We can expect this cylinder head to be very good on foot-pounds of torque, right? Also, this lays the format for the ultimate horsepower determination factor, which we'll get to in a moment. Here's exhaust port velocity. As you can see, our 186 casting has a very good lead in this shootout here. Now, what's the importance of port velocity on the exhaust? Simple. This determines how well the engine comes on the cam in the first instance. That's if it's good down here. And secondly, if it's good everywhere else up here, it has a great deal to do with how well the exhaust scavenges the combustion chamber during the overlap period, right? This higher velocity here generates a bigger reverse wave, so that's an advantage for us. Now here's a really telltale point here. Port energy. This is a function of the mass of air going out the exhaust and the velocity which it goes out. The more port energy we have on the intake, the better it rams the cylinder at the end of the intake cycle. Well, in fact, if it builds up enough velocity, the better it rams the cylinder throughout the induction pulse and into the degrees of duration past bottom dead center. You can see that the AFR is good. Ours is better. On to exhaust port energy. Once again, our 186 head casting, our 50-plus-year-old 186 head casting, can be made to produce better results than a current high-performance, proven aftermarket aluminum head from a reputable company like AFR. Right? There we go. That should give you a good idea of what we've achieved. And last on the list for our port analysis is Swirl. Here's our Swirl curve. I don't have anything that I can immediately compare it to, but not in graphical form. But this here is a very good curve. It rivals that of a Vortec cylinder head, which makes very good low-speed torque. So we can expect good low-speed torque from this head. Now, there are some people in the porting business will say too much swirl on a high-performance head and the power goes down. Yes, that can be the case. If you have a carburetor or carburetors that deliver too large of fuel droplets, you'll find that this high swirl can centrifuge those large droplets onto the wall of the port. Your problem is not too much swirl, it's not enough or good enough atomization. So you need to look into that. Good carburetor, this swirl curve works extremely well for a street motor turning up to 7,000 RPM. Now let's look at its horsepower potential. Remember, the IOP program that I'm using can do this to within close limits. So let's take a look at that. Well, here is our opening and closing page of the IOP program, and I've already put in the mean port area and the flow, the intake flow at the lift we're going to use, which will be about 600. I've also entered the compression ratio and basically modeled a 302 engine on here. Best torque that it's going to achieve is 425 foot-pounds. best horsepower based on cylinder head port area limitations, 531. But the best horsepower it will produce on airflow limitations is higher. What we're going to find is we will probably just go by this, right? Now, in reality, what we found was some years ago with a 302 with heads like, sorry, a 327 with heads like this, is that it surpassed the 550 horsepower mark, even though it was supposed only to make about this much. But that's because it did take advantage of this extra airflow, and the head worked very well. Our foot-pounds was up to about 445, 450 foot-pounds. That's on a 10.5 to 1 compression. So it's very streetable, and you can expect good results from it. And these numbers do assume you have the right camshaft, a good intake manifold, and a good exhaust, and you know how to build engines. So let's see what happens if we turn it into a racer and put in a modest 12.5 to 1 compression ratio. What are we going to get? Best torque, 470 foot-pounds. Best horsepower, 587. Now then, that looks like a big number. It is. It's going to take a tunnel ram, right? However, I can verify that on a race 302 with a single 4-barrel, we did make 550. So that number may not be too far off. And that was some years ago. No fancy 1mm rings or things like that. It was good old 16th inch rings. So that cylinder head has great potential. But I know a lot of you may want to use it on a 350. Let's take a look at that. Here we are with the 350's input, right? Increase the stroke. Our best torque should be around about 493 foot-pounds. Well, we haven't been quite up to that with a single 4-barrel, but we have seen about 476 to 480. I'm thinking that with a tunnel ram on, that it will do this number with a 10.5 to 1 compression. Horsepower limitation on a single 4-barrel would be about 531, right? But you're likely to see probably 550 in reality, because there's enough air for it. Well, that brings us to the end of our adventures with an early casting. Hopefully you've learned a lot more than just the fact that these castings can produce good results if you know how. Like I said earlier, it's not that they're full of technology we didn't know back then. It's that we have better technology now to make the most of them, at least out of my school here. I don't know how other people get on with these, but certainly we find that what we're doing here pays off when it comes to going down the drag strip or going around a road course. Now let me say, because I don't want you to forget this, just remember we run a porting school here, website going across the bottom there, and we will teach you stuff that you cannot learn in any other porting school on the face of the planet. Just check up with those other porting schools and ask them if they can tell us all about the stuff you're just seeing in these videos. The reality is, we're only scratching the surface here of what we will teach you. I don't care if you're already top echelon head porter. You'll learn if you come over here. Nobody else teaching this stuff has had their stuff on F1 engines except me. Now, the other thing I want you to do is please like, subscribe, and request notification, and make those comments, right? If you've got something that will improve our performance, good for you. We want to hear about it. We're here to help you. I need you to help us help you, if that makes sense. Thank you.